three witnesses that are in place. I'm not interrupting anybody else's conversation, am I? Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah. We have our witnesses in place. It's 8:15, and we have quorum. I generally consider it disadvantageous to be coming in virtually, but if Marta Cape is ready to go, I will call upon you first, but I do want to welcome Dominic Arel, chairholder of the Ukrainian Studies at University of Ottawa, and Stephen Siderman, Patterson Chair of International Affairs, Norman Patterson School of International Affairs, Carleton University. I spent some pleasant time last night with your colleague, Stephanie Carvin. Colleagues, I hope that because we have these witnesses for 2 hours, I hope to get through 3 rounds of questions. And I propose to go through the first 2 rounds as is laid out here, and then go to the second second set of questioners. That way everybody should be able to get in all the questions I wanted to ask of these very excellent witnesses. So with that, if we call upon Marta Cape for the Senior Policy for Analyst for RAND, you have 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to address the committee on the topic of security in the Baltic region. The security environment in the Baltic region has degraded since Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine in February 2022. Since then, Russia's military forces have been focused on fighting in Ukraine, which has decimated its land capabilities previously located near the Baltic borders. Having said that, Russia has announced plans to restructure its military districts on the borders of the Baltics and Finland, and these plans may be indicative of a trend towards a long-term confrontation between Russia and the West. Russia also maintains a capable and dense air defenses in Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg and coastal defense missiles in Kaliningrad, which could be a potential threat as they are able to reach into the territories of the Baltic states, Finland and Poland, and could interdict maritime and commercial activity throughout the maritime area. At the same time, Russia's hybrid activities in the region have intensified. This is what Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas called a shadow war against the West. This war is mainly waged through non-military actions such as disinformation, cyber attacks, acts of sabotage, psychological pressure, weaponized migration, and increased intelligence activities. Some of these activities are not necessarily new, they're just being scaled up. Those include cyber attacks, misinformation, disinformation campaigns. Some are more novel, let's put it like that. These are, for example, attacks on undersea and land critical infrastructure, which have revealed a very important vulnerability, which is that seabed infrastructure is vitally important for modern economies, but they're also very poorly monitored and protected. We also see an increase in low-level sabotage activities and vandalism activities, and what Lithuanian officials have called political terrorism in the Baltic states, and also elsewhere. These seemingly random acts of vandalism or sabotage are likely aimed at creating a sense of uncertainty of what is next, and probably also creating the appearance of growing opposition to support to Ukraine as well. Russian jamming of global positioning system or GPS signals in the Baltic region have also intensified, disrupting air and sea navigation and affecting numerous commercial flights. But here I do have to admit that some of the more recent examples of GPS jamming in the Baltic region may actually be likely due to Russia simply turning up its anti-drone defenses around key population centers in Western Russia. And then we also have Russian violations of Baltic airspace, which have not only increased, but actually since September 7th this year have also diversified. So you may have heard that on September 7th, a Russian Shahed drone fell down in eastern Latvia. So in light of these events, the Baltic states and also NATO have made a lot of developments and made a lot of changes. NATO Baltic states are among the top spenders in terms of defense investment in terms of GDP across NATO. They have been investing in their armed forces, investing in their exercises and training as well. And Finland and Sweden joining NATO has been a very important development for how we can think about the defense and security of the region. Now, NATO is able to think about the region in a more comprehensive manner, in a more joint manner as well. In terms of military operations and military preparedness, I also want to highlight the fact that we have done a lot to improve military mobility. It is not completely solved, but it has become easier and faster. And Baltic states are boosting their capabilities through equipment, procurements, and as I said, training, and also in the case of Latvia through return to conscription. Now, continued allied, including Canadian military presence, will be vital for deterrence and defense of the region. NATO and the Baltics do need to remain vigilant and continue to develop the defense capabilities in the region. With time, Russia's measures in the region across NATO will likely adjust as it tailors it to new vulnerabilities. This means that Canada and the alliance and the Baltic states will need to closely monitor Russian attempts to shift red lines to exploit our vulnerabilities and our boundaries. As the Baltic states are working on strengthening their defense capabilities, allied support will be crucial in key areas. That includes air defense. In terms of addressing hybrid and gray zone threats, a lot of things that the Baltic states can do are really national responsibilities, but external support will continue to be important. I will stop here.
Can you wind up your remarks?
Discussions.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Rell.
Me? Okay. So good morning. Bonjour. So the increasing devastation of the war in Ukraine has brought a degree of clarity on three issues. First, Ukraine cannot defend itself against glide bombs at or near the front lines and against ballistic missiles aimed at its cities. It would need 25 Patriot-type air defense systems, was promised 7, and has thus far received even less, although we don't have the official number, it's secret. Second, sanctions against the import of microprocessors on which guided missiles and bombs are dependent do not work, largely because China refuses to implement them. Third, Ukraine cannot win the Donbas attrition warfare because all NATO members put together cannot match Russian annual artillery production, and because the huge Russian casualties are not impacting the stability of the Russian regime. This dire military disadvantage has led Ukraine to conclude that the best defense is offense. The best protection against daily attacks is to hit at the source. Ukraine already does it with fast-developing attack drones against munition depot. We saw the case yesterday. Oil refineries and military airports inside Russia. But it could do it with far greater impact if it were to receive permission from the United States to use the long-range missiles it already possesses, but which are restricted to legal Ukrainian territories. The US has refused due to a fear of escalation, we are told, repeatedly. It would appear, however, that escalation is already upon us. Russia has escalated before a decision has been made regarding the use of these long-range missiles. Escalation is associated with the threat that Russia may resort to nuclear weapons. The threat is empty. Ukraine invaded a part of Kursk Oblast, and Russia responded militarily through conventional means and politically by pretending that nothing serious happened. A more credible threat is for Russia to break the taboo of nuclear proliferation by assisting Iran and North Korea. There are worrying signs that the latter may already be in motion, emphasis on may. A second threat is Russia helping Iran to target American assets in the Middle East. Iran has just sent ballistic missiles to Russia in a, quote, dramatic escalation, in the words of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And the question is, what is Iran getting of great value in return? Once again, the escalation appears to precede the American decision over the long-range missiles. Putin claimed last week that since Ukrainians could not use these missiles on their own, having to rely on U.S. satellite data in particular, this would make NATO a direct party to the war. Yet, these missiles have long hit Crimea, in and around Crimea, which Putin considers not only legal territory, but eternal Russian territory. And the response has been strictly conventional. A third element of threat, my colleague Marta Kepe mentioned it at length in her presentation, it is the threat to attack communication, energy, military infrastructure in the West, and the provocation over crossing the air, like with Romania the other day. The argument has been made that these long-range missiles will not be a game changer, but this is besides the point. What the missiles could do is to considerably raise the Russian military cost of attacking Ukraine. Deterrence is ultimately the only way to provide Ukraine with security guarantees. Thank you.
Dr. Rell. Dr. Snyderman.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. I have to start with some caveats and a call for humility. My work started out on the international relations of ethnic conflict. So there's something about irredentism, which is what is in part driving what Russia's doing these days. But I've moved on to alliances and civil-military relations. I am not a Russia or Ukraine or Baltics expert. I've been to Riga a couple of times and the past couple of years, and I'm more of a Canadian defense person. So when I was asked in 2022 how long Ukraine would last, I underestimated Ukraine's resolve, preparedness, and leadership. And I also overestimated Russia's military. So I need to focus on what we got wrong, what we have gotten right, what has been consistent, and what has been more fluid, more uncertain. The greatest uncertainty we face in Ukraine and in Russia and in the Baltics is really in Washington and in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and all those other places, because things will change quite remarkably depending on the election. If Harris wins, we should expect the status quo to remain the same, depending in part on whether the Democrats pick up the House and keep the Senate. If Trump wins, the future is bleak everywhere, but especially in Ukraine, as there's no substitute for U.S. support. Similarly, if Trump wins, NATO will either cease to exist or will exist only formally. The commitment of Article 5 will no longer be relevant. There is no Trump-proofing NATO. I can talk more about that in the Q&A. Which gets to a very important dynamic that I think has been unappreciated for the security situation in the Baltics and Eastern Europe, which is Russia under Putin has been engaged in all kinds of aggressive behavior, as has been mentioned thus far, but there's not been one single conventional attack across the bright, shiny line that divides NATO from non-NATO countries. That matters a great deal to Putin. And as long as the U.S. continues to lead, as long as the U.S. continues to be led by those who support the alliance, the Baltic security is actually pretty good, although the folks in the region will disagree with that. Canada, along with much of NATO, has invested seriously for the long term. We used to dodge the idea of permanent basing, but we no longer are respecting the long-dead NATO-Russia Founding Act. We've moved from having enough forces in the region to deter the Russians to potentially defeat an attack upon the Baltics. We've learned much from the Ukraine war about our limitations, not having nearly enough artillery or ammunition, for instance, and Russia's limitations. Moreover, Russia's military is very much depleted, as the first speaker noted. We can have an argument about how quickly Russia can reconstitute its military, but right now there are far fewer tanks, artillery, and infantry on the other side of the border. To be sure, Russian air power and sea power, aside from the Black Sea fleet, is far less depleted by the war. Whereas Canada in all of this, Canada's made a huge contribution in training the Ukraine military before the war started, or before the second invasion. The effort in Latvia has been outstanding in terms of Canada having the hardest job because, well, we moved last, so we got the smallest contributions from many countries that were not the best militaries in the alliance, and Canada, the CAF, has managed this quite well. The enlargement from battle groups to brigades has put even more pressure on Canada, so it means a much bigger commitment, which in turn means more troops rotating through Latvia more frequently. However, Swedish membership in NATO means many more high-quality troops in Latvia, potentially. They've promised some troops. The question remains, how many troops can Canada sustain in Latvia? As I said, I've been to the battle group a couple of times. It is clear the frequent rotations are stressing the force. It may make sense to have longer tours, so there's less people going back and forth, build infrastructure for them, so that time can pass more easily. We might want to think about the Cold War model of having families join their troops in Latvia. That would be expensive with schools, daycare, and creative ways to keep the spouses employed, but it's not clear that having 1,500 troops come and go every 6 months is sustainable. For future reference, Canada and other democracies need to be more careful about the numbers we promise. Our army is simply not that big. Speaking of limitations, our small military simply does not have that much stuff to give to Ukraine. We could consider what some other countries have done and give away entire segments of their armed forces. We have repeatedly reconsidered whether we should have tanks over the past 20 or 30 years. We could, for instance, give all of our tanks working and broken to Ukraine and have them handle them, and we realign our force. In the field right now, this has happened mostly at the battle group I saw in 2023 in Latvia, which was not centered around Canadian tanks, but around those from our partners. However, given our own recruitment and retention crisis and our slow procurement processes, it is unlikely for Canada to make that big decision. One key underrated change in the region is we are no longer participating in the rotation of air patrolling. We used to have 6 packs of 6 CF-18s rotate into and out of Romania and flying around the region. That was a major contribution to the air situation, and we're no longer doing that. So the one thing I want to point out that hasn't come up is the civil-military relations of the region, which is we need to keep an eye on what Zelensky's doing with his officers, whether he's maintaining good civilian control of the military or whether he's appointing people that he likes for their political favors. So that's just one challenge. On the other hand, challenge which has come up is when will the Russian military mutiny? It is how the Russian involvement in World War I ended, and given the bloodshed they've suffered, that is one possibility that could be happening sometime, given the abuse that those soldiers have faced. I'll cut it off now, and we can.
Thank you, Dr. Seiderman. We'll go to our 6-minute round. I have Gallant, Lapointe, Normandin, Matheson. Ms. Gallant, 6 minutes.
All right. Firstly, for Madam Kemp, Minister Blair announced in February of this year $46 million to acquire new counter-drone equipment for Latvia to defend against Class 1 drones. Is this new system sufficient to detect and destroy incoming Russian Lancet kamikaze drones? And then I asked Ms. Kemp from RAND that question.
Oh, do I respond right now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I cannot tell you off the top of my head specifically what type of drone it will be effective against. What I do want to say that, in fact, when I spoke about the capabilities that Baltic states really need assistance with, they are working on counter-drone capabilities, but assistance in terms of counter-drone capabilities is very important. And here, I mean, counter drones against a number of different types of drones, starting from very small ones, because those can be used, as we know, also to do attacks. We see plenty of those examples from both sides in Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine, to all the way to much larger, much more sophisticated, complicated drones as well. So Shakid would be sort of, let's say, a bigger one. So here, I would say the counter-drone capability is needed across the spectrum.
What kind of drone was recovered in Latvia? Was that a kamikaze or surveillance?
She's muted.
You went on mute. I think you just put yourself on mute.
Yeah, so that was the Iranian Shahed drone. And I understand, so Shahed drone is basically like a loitering munition type of unmanned aerial system. So yes, you may refer to it as also as a kamikaze drone or as a suicide drone, right? It's basically an autonomous flying weapon. So that is what was recovered in Latvia. Investigation is still ongoing, so we only know what has been in the media.
Thank you.
But we know that they have recovered it there.
Okay, Mr. Arel, the lack of ground-based long-range anti-air capabilities like Patriot missiles or NASAMS for our troops, especially defending Latvia, vulnerable to the high-altitude aircraft like Tu-160 and the Tu-95 bombers, cruise missiles, and hypersonic missiles. How can we defend ourselves from these threats without any plan from our government to acquire long-range SAMs to counter these threats?
Is the question related to the Baltics or to Ukraine?
To Latvia.
To Latvia. I cannot really address the Latvia situation. I'll leave that to my colleagues.
All right.
Address Ukraine.
Would Mr. Sederman be able to address that?
I would say that the Latvia situation is a multilateral effort, and so we would be depending on our allies for the help in air defense. The United States has air defense capabilities in the region. The British, the Germans have some capabilities. The benefit of the Baltics regions, it's small, so the threats that are facing us are not only facing us, but they're facing our allies in the region. So we don't have the capability. They're currently trying to reinvest in that capability. But no, we don't have that ability ourselves at this moment.
So this may be for Mr. Arel. There's also the ground-based air defense project, GBAD, that claims to defeat threats posed by rockets, artillery, mortar munitions, air-to-surface missiles, and drones, with attack aircraft and helicopter relegated to second targets. Why hasn't our government seen the need to counter threats from high-altitude bombers, given their ability to launch cruise missiles and, more worryingly, hypersonic? And that would apply to Canada as well as Latvia.
What I can say regarding Canada from my Ukraine vantage point, I don't see a political will really to engage to make major changes in what Canada can provide abroad and what Canada can produce for itself, as you referred to. So Canada promised 20 or 21 months ago a system in the family of Patriot systems, and it still has not been delivered. There's been decisions or non-decisions regarding budget reallocations for the military. We are familiar with the problem. Canada's a laggard in the infamous 2% threshold, and that's been 2.5 years going. So from a Ukraine perspective, Canada is not alone. There's a lot of promises are made, but then the delivery is very slow. And the reality right now is Ukraine cannot defend itself against these systematic attacks. That's the escalation. The escalation is Russia is doing more and more and more of these attacks on civilian targets, which is why the strategy in Ukraine has to be now dual, to change, not just to expect how can we defend ourselves while we're being destroyed, but to go on the offense.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant.
Just let him go.
Ms. LaPointe.
Chair, my question is for Ms. Keep. In your opening statement, you talked about the shadow war against the West. Can you expand on that and provide this committee with further examples?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So this, Prime Minister Kaja Kallas really used this really interesting way of talking about the shadow war, and exactly that is something that we would put under what we normally talk about as activities under the threshold of war, gray zone activities, also hybrid security risks as well. And there are a number of issues that are going on, probably the attacks on infrastructure, but not only attacks on infrastructure, also collecting intelligence and valuable information on critical infrastructure and vital services is something that, with accumulation of information, the adversary can gain a lot of information, can get a lot of sort of valuable information that basically they would need to do what we refer to as information preparation for the battlefield. So understanding what is the field, what is the battlefield that you would fight in. But I would say I would actually advise against maybe reading a lot of sort of preparation for war in some of these activities that are happening in the Baltic Sea region in general. A lot of that can also be directed, the intention here can also be to sow sort of sow uncertainty, sort of intimidation tactics as well, sort of undermine cohesion, create this sort of sense that maybe we have to live with Russia in our backyard, and this is just how life is. So let's just work with them in a way that works for them.
Okay, thank you. My next question to you is a two-part question. So speaking of cyber threats, we've certainly seen an increase of cyber threats by Russia against Ukraine, Europe, and North America. What do you believe the NATO nations' main vulnerabilities are to cyber threats from Russia? And the second part of the question is, what types of scenarios should we realistically consider as potential imminent threats, and where should we focus our mitigation efforts?
These are very difficult questions, I have to say. The first one about cyber threats, main vulnerability, the main issue here is that what we see is, general sort of we as the West have a lot of experience already with not only Russian, but cyber threats from other actors as well. So the capability, the skill, the understanding how to work, the procedures, processes are in place. However, processes and procedures can always be improved, especially when it comes to information and intelligence sharing, so that we can help our friend and neighbor across the West to be better at addressing the threat that's coming in. The NATO has created new channels of how to ensure that there can be help when needed. I believe it was Western Balkan countries that was the first to use this new framework of assistance. And the other thing is the ability to respond to cyber attacks and threats that are waged at scale, because new technologies, automation systems, AI, what does it really do? It helps the adversary to create a lot of attacks at the same time. So that would be probably my main concern. It's definitely not the only concern at this time, but I would like to highlight that. And the other was the main vulnerability in general.
Where should we focus our mitigation efforts against these threats?
So we look at hybrid threats in total. The focus, and I'm talking about this focus because this is the area where if we do have a vulnerability and that it is exploited, then it can have a lot of effect, a lot of bad consequences. So that means really building the resilience of our critical infrastructure of vital services, our energy systems, our food and water systems, things that people need to survive. I would put a lot of focus on that. Of course, many other things also need resilience building, information sharing, cooperation, best practice sharing. A lot of the how to do that, I would say, is really about informing and sharing best practices, because then countries, local governments, etc., can actually figure out how to do it and what are the things that would work best for them.
45 seconds.
Oh, goodness. Mr. Seidman, you talked about there's no Trump-proofing NATO. Can you expand on that in probably 30 seconds now?
The challenge of NATO is that it's the heart of it is the Article 5, an attack upon one is equal to attack upon all. He's made it very clear that he's not very concerned about that, and he has talked about making it contingent on 2%. Now we have his VP candidate talking about it being contingent on other dynamics related to immigration and other strange things. It's clear they don't take NATO very seriously, and they spent a lot of time in the last time around trying to educate Trump about NATO, and he was pretty ruthless about not learning those lessons. And he has a lot of resentment towards NATO because he remembers not feeling very comfortable at all the summits and not being a member of the club. And he is a man animated almost entirely by resentment, so it doesn't portend well for the organization. And he was always opposed. I mean, his first campaign commitments in 2015 was about being anti-NATO.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Ms. Normandin will speak en français, so if you just adjust if needs be. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Professor Seidman, I'll get back to that issue of Trump and of NATO, but I'll start with Mr. Arel. You referred to a risk of escalation of violence if there were longer range strikes, but you mentioned that the concerns about escalation in a nuclear realm is not really what we need to focus on, but really we should be focused on escalation in the Middle East. Should we review our narrative so that the public can really understand what the issues are, so that deterrence can be affected in the right places if we need to engage in long-range strikes? Should we look at this narrative, perhaps, to allow for a better acceptance of this type of thing? That's an excellent question. The narrative is to say nothing. It's this fear of escalation, And, of course, the Americans will say that 90% of the bombers over there, those glide bombs, or supersonic missiles, they are out of range anyways of those ATACMS missiles. So it wouldn't change anything. That's empirical. But as for the rest of your comment, in the public space, NATO, I mean, in the U.S. and in Europe, not much better. There's not much transparency. What are we really referring to when we're talking about escalation? Because we live in a democracy, I mean, in Europe, in Canada, and in the U.S., this information ends up trickling down, but you really need to be paying attention. You know, the public is thinking Third World War, nuclear war, and that's it. What strikes me as clear from the start is that there have been threats since February 24th. Those threats were not veiled threats. The response has always been conventional, and conventional against civilians. Ukrainian civilians are bearing the brunt of this. That's the response. When you are discussing deterrence from a strategic standpoint, the major danger is to cede to this fear of escalation when, for the first time, a nuclear power issues threats, utters these threats about using its nuclear weapons for aggression purposes and not for defense purposes. If NATO, Canada, the U.S. cede to this, well, to me, it's the end of this fundamental international norm. And that, I think, would have consequences. And I think that's the perception in Europe, that it won't stop at the doors of Ukraine, that if Ukraine fell, because there's a fear of escalation. So then Ukraine can't defend itself. Thank you very much. Mr. Seidman, on the issue of Trump perhaps taking these elections, and what about the other countries around Ukraine? What about the EFPs, deterrence operations? I'm thinking of Poland, where there's a strong American presence. Poland has gotten to 2%, in fact, gone beyond 2% of GDP. I mean, those countries are actually doing what Trump is wanting them to do in a way, and can we expect that the American support will be maintained?
I would say even those countries that spend 2% should not expect the support of Trump. He creates lots of uncertainty about everything, and the whole idea of NATO for 70 years was to try to create some certainty about the American commitment to Europe. So perhaps the most controversial thing I could say about this is that if Trump becomes president, I would expect Poland to seriously consider nuclear proliferation, because they can't count on the American nuclear umbrella with the Trump presidency, and nobody's counting on the French or the British nuclear weapons to be extended to deter attacks upon the Baltics. They would be on their own to a certain degree. The history of the European Union trying to develop significant international cooperation to be a replacement for NATO has failed. Now, maybe the impetus of having the United States no longer being a committed defender to Eastern Europe would encourage that. But I think if you talk to people in the region, they don't have a lot of faith in the European Union standing up if NATO were to become less effective or become irrelevant.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. A question for you, Madam Keppe. I'd like to get back to the issue of conscription. I'll ask the question quickly. What is the state of mind, if you will, of the various Baltic states? I don't think Estonia has conscription yet. And is that being considered? And also, what is the perception in the public? Have things changed as the conflict extends in Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you. So all three Baltic states by now have conscription. Estonia never actually said goodbye to its conscription. It has had it since early 1990s when they regained independence. And in fact, we now have, the Baltic states and also the Nordic countries all have some sort of a total defense or whole of society defense system where civilian contribution to defense, national defense and security is paramount to those systems. So conscription, and Lithuania had basically had a sort of hybrid conscription system, which they also went back to a sort of fuller type of conscription already earlier. In terms of population support for conscription or national service, when Latvia only reintroduced it a year or so ago, there always tends to be some sort of concern whether the population will be fine with it, whether people will actually be happy to serve. What they have done, what we see also in some other countries that are trying to reintroduce conscription, is that at first there actually is a lot of interest. So the first
unfortunately,
rounds.
Unfortunately, Madame Normandine has gone way past her time.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Madame Matheson, who's very time sensitive. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to Trump, because that's always the... Actually, it's more about that connection of what we're seeing within NATO allies now, of that movement, the far right being specifically linked to very pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian sentiment. We're seeing it with America. We're seeing it with Hungary a bit now, which is concerning, of course. Could you expand on that in terms of describing that link, why that exists?
That's a really good question. There's a variety of links between the far right and the Russian government. The Russian government has engaged in significant disinformation efforts that have been facilitating the far right. Why does the far right find Putin attractive? Part of the far right's endeavor is to delegitimize existing institutions, and they also proto-authoritarian, and so they find Putin's efforts to be helpful, and they find Putin to be a model. That they want to have an authoritarian regime that's far right. They're anti-democratic. Viktor Orban has been at the forefront of this. That Hungary has led the movement on democratic backsliding. He's been fond of talking about illiberal democracy. He's been very fond of using homophobia, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hatred to mobilize support for his regime and to undermine his opponents, and to do that in the neighborhood as well. And that playbook has been imitated by far-right politicians in Europe and North America. It's not an accident these days that trans people are demonized. It's not an accident that anti-Semitism is rising. It's not an accident that Islamophobia is rising. All these things travel together, and Putin's ideology is very, very similar to the ideology by the far-right political movements in the United States, Canada, and Europe.
Does NATO have any sort of actual defense to that within its own internal structures?
Yes and no, in that they have spent a fair amount of time thinking about disinformation, right? So they have a strategic communications center of excellence in Latvia. They've been talking about disinformation for quite some time, but the problem is, I had a graduate student work on this, that foreign election interference and that stuff depends crucially on domestic allies. So it really depends on the domestic politics of each member of NATO about whether the right-wing parties will fight against the far right or ally with them. And we've seen mixtures of this, one way or the other, and it makes a big difference which side the right-wing parties take on this stuff.
I mean, this certainly isn't anything that isn't new to Canada as well. In terms of even just like last week, we saw that far-right startup. It's called Tenet Media. It was the front for Putin propaganda. They've been promoting very anti-Ukrainian messages. They do so about vaccines, residential schools, like you said, anti-LGBTQ plus attacks, anti-trans attacks. They're making videos. They're combining with Rebel Media does the same. True North does the same. We know, so that's part of that larger strategy. What responsibility do we have here in Canada to defeat that internally as well? How do we do that in a nutshell? Right? In a few minutes.
The 30 seconds I have left.
You have more than that.
I know,
I'll give you my time.
Yeah, I think this is the central question of our day, right? Because there's political temptations by any party to criticize other parties for whatever stance they're taking. And the challenge of our political system is adversarial, so it's very hard to get all the parties on the same side about the fact that there are malevolent actors out there who are trying to use our divides against us. It requires the current government be more transparent about what's been going on, and it requires the opposition parties to ask the right questions, ask good questions about the quality of government response to these things, but also not to undermine, for instance, existing oversight bodies. So NISICOP, NISIRA, those kinds of things are supposed to build faith in our oversight of our intelligence apparatus. And so we need to be more careful about playing politics with those organizations. The question is, how much can our politicians come together and talk about this stuff? We had a pretty good response in 2021 during that election about election interference. So the question is, in the next election, can we have the parties agree to rules about how to deal with outsiders trying to affect things? We have some parties supporting conservative candidates. We have some outsiders, supporting conservative candidates. We have some outsiders supporting liberal candidates. It's not like any one party benefits or is hurt by foreign election interference. They're all hurt by it. It hurts our system, which, it decreases the trust in the system, which then means that far-right parties then end up getting maybe more support. Luckily, that hasn't really happened here yet, but it has to be where each party polices its own, and we also have to expect better efforts by the media not to legitimize the news stories that come out of far-right folks, that we can't have this false equivalence where, well, True North says this and the New York Times says that, so therefore the truth is somewhere in between. It's not. So we need to be more careful about what we amplify and what we platform.
Do any of the political parties have those internal mechanisms adequately? Like, is there a way to strengthen those internal mechanisms with any party? Do they have them, to your knowledge?
Very briefly, please. Ms. Masson has passed her time.
I don't know the internal machinery of any of the parties. I don't know whether what they have, but it's something they need to take seriously.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, we're on to our second round. I have at least 6 motions that have been properly tabled or in time may even want to be debated today. I propose that we at least get through one second round of questioning without motions. I hope that's good enough. And then at the third round, you indicate to me whether there are going to be motions, in which case we can manage the witnesses' time properly. So issues, but we were with Mr. Stewart. Stewart, I think we're around 3 minutes left for you.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the general state of repair of our equipment in Latvia. You know, it seems in Canada a lot of things are broken, and is the equipment we have in Latvia, can you comment on the general state of repair of that equipment there?
I can't speak to the very specifics of it. I think generally we send our best equipment to the field, and I would say that in my conversations with the folks I had in the battle group, the reports about various things are a bit overstated in terms of the lack of resources. I think the bigger challenge in Latvia, our forces in Latvia, is they simply don't have as much ammunition to practice the art of war, and that's what they're really lacking. Not really that their equipment is inferior.
And in that case, if we don't have inferior equipment, we're also able to repair it on our own and not rely on allies for that supply chain.
I can't speak to the specifics of the supply chain, but again, the idea of the alliance is we're supposed to be interoperable. We're supposed to be able to have our allies help us do things. We don't, the way the battle group is organized is that we don't have Canadians in every position because we have allies in some of these positions. So some of the maintenance of this stuff is maybe done through allied supply chains, and that's not a bad thing.
Okay, we talked about 1,500 troops every 6 months. That's 3,000 troops a year. Do we have the regular forces and the reservists to supplement that at a trained and ready condition?
I think we do in the short term. The challenge is that it becomes a recruiting and retention problem because the troops want to have new and different experiences. And so people are now on their second, third, fourth tours. And so in the long run, this has become stressful. We have enough bodies for this at the moment, but the challenge is how do we make the mission easier, more attractive, more engaging, so that way that becomes a recruitment tool as opposed to an impediment for recruitment.
Right, and does that leave us vulnerable at home if all of our assets are directed towards one expeditionary mission? No, because our other adversary that we think of as China, and our army is not really designed to fight a war with China. It would not be called upon to send troops to China. Our Air Force and our Navy are more positioned towards the Pacific, so I think the division of labor kind of makes sense. Our Army is dedicated to the land war, to potential land war in Europe, and our Navy and Air Force are mostly pointed elsewhere. Do you have more time? Okay. Where do we stand versus other countries with respect to our contribution to the Ukraine war?
I don't have the latest statistics on this. I think we're probably in the middle of the pack. There are lots of countries that made bigger promises than us and haven't delivered. We've made a fair amount of commitments. Is it proportional to our economy compared to the other folks? Probably we could be doing a bit more, but again, we're still recovering from the Afghanistan war in terms of preparing ourselves for a more peer-to-peer kind of war, and so. Oh, I understand that, but the challenge is procurement takes time, and everybody is in the same line for Stingers, for anti-tank missiles, and all the rest. We can't jump to the line of every weapons procurement that is coming out of other countries, and we don't have the capability for making Stingers, for instance. Thank you.
Ms. Lambropoulos, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here to answer questions on this important topic. My first question will be to Mr. Harel, and I'd like to ask you if you can explain to Canadians in terms that the average Canadian would understand why it is important for Canada to continue helping out these war efforts for Ukraine.
Thank you. Let me just say two things quickly. I'm glad to meet you because I'm from the Saint Laurent riding in Montreal.
Oh, nice. My constituent.
And second, I won't say it now, but I'd like to have an opportunity at some point to say things about Trump and NATO and the far right in Russia, because I have an alternative, let's say, even on the drones. But on the question, that's an excellent question. We had the war in Donbass in 2014. It was seen as bad, destabilizing, violation of international law, etc. But the unsaid consensus in the West, so in Canada, in the US, and among the NATO alliance, it was that it was a regional conflict. Illegal, Crimea illegally annexed, but no danger of spilling over. It has to be contained. And the corollary was we're not sending any weapons. Fear of escalation. And then the Minsk protocol, we have to find a diplomatic solution. It didn't work. The qualitative change in 2022, and that's been very clear by NATO members, this is a threat. So the full-scale invasion is a threat to international security. It's a threat to European security. Canada is part of the alliance. What that means in simple terms, like to the public, is that Putin will not stop in Ukraine. It will not stop. So the idea is, well, we have to find a ceasefire, just let's stop the war. The war will not stop. Maybe the shooting will stop for a while, and then it will start again. Just ask, we could say just ask the Poles, but okay, they were part of the Warsaw Pact. They've been occupied for 40 years. Just ask the Estonians, oh yeah, they used to be in the Soviet Union, they're emotional. Well, why don't we ask the Swedes and the Finns and the Danes and the Dutch and so forth? They have the realization. In the case of Finland and Sweden, they basically overnight put a term to 75 and 200 years of neutrality because they really fear Russian aggression. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much for your response. Would you like to weigh in as well?
I agree with the larger sentiment here. I mean, it's already impacted us. We've been having this debate about inflation for the past few years in Canada. Well, where did that inflation come from? It came from partly a spike in food prices because the Russians attacked the breadbasket of Ukraine, major grain producer. So there are economic implications of this, and that Canadians have been feeling for the past couple of years. So our foreign policy is aimed not only at our national security, but our economic security. And this war has been bad for us. Just like if China attacked Taiwan, that would disrupt international trade and cause a dramatic challenge to our economy. So we're involved in the world to prevent these things from visiting us either indirectly or directly. Part of the war, Putin's war, is also to test NATO. He's a bad strategist because it's actually led to a strengthening of NATO. But we need to support NATO. We've made a commitment to NATO, and this is a threat. This war is not a direct, immediate physical threat to Canada, but it is a direct, immediate physical threat to the countries in the region. And so as our commitment to NATO, we belong to that alliance, and we continue to need to support it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Harel, you also mentioned that Russia has been working more closely with Iran, North Korea, and I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more to their involvement with Russia at this time.
So North Korea has sent a ton of artillery. We're talking millions of shells. So clearly it has an impact on the attrition war in Donbass, when at some point the ratio of Russian versus Ukrainian artillery reached 10-1. Now it's down maybe to 5-1, but it's still a massive advantage. It has sent ballistic missiles. So for the first time, we have, forever the North Korean threat has been the nuclear threat. And now North Korea is sending ballistic missiles in Europe for a European country to attack another European country. So that's, in a sense, it's not World War III, but suddenly we have a war that is far beyond the European continent. And what's happening with Iran, now having sent also ballistic missile, has been confirmed. And the great danger is what, of course, Russia is getting, Iran or North Korea are getting in return. What is Russian role in these regions, so in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia, to destabilize the region? It can impact, in the case of North Korea, very much South Korean policy.
I have to leave it there.
Yeah, South Korean policy vis-à-vis Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
2.5 minutes, Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup, Professeur Harel.
Thank you very much, Professor Harel. I have another question for you. Actually, I had one, but I'll let you go on with what you were going to say to us about Trump and the extreme right.
Le retour de Donald Trump.
Well, the return of Donald Trump would be very, very worrisome. I won't belabor that, both for American democracy and for all of us here in Canada and NATO. But what I do want to say is this. Okay, I read at the debate, he was asked directly last week, will you defend Ukraine? Are you for the defense of Ukraine? He refused to answer that. It's quite clear. It's pretty clear. J.D. Vance is just adding to that by talking about a peace plan, which is essentially the Russian plan, a sort of capitulation of Ukraine, where Ukraine would be demilitarized. What I do want to say is this. The Republican Party today, Trump, seems to have a sort of impunity as to what he can say, as to what he wants to do on about every question, with no pushback from the Republicans themselves, except for one question. And this is empirical. Over the last year, the only question, the only important matter that has divided the Republican Party has been aid to Ukraine. Aid was suspended for 6 months, but what's remarkable is within the Republican Party, there was a bit of a revolt, if you will, to switch things so that without having Trump publicly denounce the agreement. So on the issue of what the U.S. should allow for in terms of the use of missiles, the Republicans are divided. And the chairs of committees, that is Defense, Security, Foreign Affairs at the House of Representatives, are all for allowing Ukraine to strike. If Trump resumes power, of course, it's chaos and uncertainty. It's not improbable that on that issue, politics, the policy may change, and that's what Zelensky is counting on. He's meeting Kamala Harris next week, but he's also meeting Trump for the first time. They've never met except once a few years ago at a United Nations meeting. So that is my alternative perspective on this, based on the current situation, politically speaking, in the U.S. I don't have much time to get into the other questions.
That's in 2.5 minutes.
You had talked earlier about, Mr. Arel, the power of deterrence. And of course, we all understand that. As a parliamentarian on a committee of nuclear non-proliferation, it's concerning to me, and there's always this contemplation about where that balance lies within any nail-biting action movie. It's always the president at the end of the day who says, no, I'm going to stand down and I'm not going to push that button. At what point are we there, right? At what point, who makes that decision at the end of the day? Canada has this opportunity to sign the treaty of the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It hasn't yet. Who's making those final counts? Who's making those final decisions?
So the question is, if there is evidence that Russia is threatening to basically help technologically Iran and North Korea to acquire the nuclear bomb, is that sufficient then for the United States to say, well, we can then provoke, quote unquote, Russia, and for fear that it will be doing that? Is your question? That's the question. Of course, I'm not privy to the classified information, so I don't know the extent to which it may or may not be already happening, except that we know that Russia last spring vetoed the renewal of the Oversight Security Council-led committee to enforce sanctions vis-à-vis North Korea. So anything can go in, anything can go out, such as North Korea sending even ballistic missiles to Russia, which is, of course, an enormous violation of the sanctions, but Russia is not there anymore. So the question is, if the escalation has already occurred, or the reaction is, well, we need to stand down, may actually fuel further escalation, would be the counter-argument, that Russia will continue doing what's already doing and seeing weakness advance. And again, using here the threat of nuclear use for aggressive purposes, whereas throughout the entire Cold War, the deterrence theory is basically it's defensive. Last resort, if the security of the state is at stake, then we can resort to nuclear weapons. Of course, Russia claims that the war of aggression in Ukraine is a war of self-defense, which nobody buys, certainly not NATO, but that's the claim, using, again, the official kind of NATO-era doctrine, but putting it upside down.
Ms. Masson, is it Mr. Allison?
Thank you. How about 5 minutes?
Well, it has a split between you and Bazan.
Okay, so I'll just, okay, that sounds good.
No, just
let him talk.
Allison, 5 minutes?
Yeah,
All right,
full
okay.
five.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses, thank you for being here. I'm going to continue along that train of thought first, but I want to get Ms. Kapp into the discussion. I asked our witnesses on Tuesday what their thought process was when it came to nuclear threats, and the master said she wasn't concerned. The generals also said that. I'd just like your take, Ms. Kapp, in terms of what you think in terms of, lots of disinformation coming from Russia. So is this just more saber rattling? And, is there some point we should be concerned? We have talked about weapons moving around, and we can come back to that in a second. But I'd just love to have your thoughts on it.
I'll try to be very quick this time. So the nuclear threat conversation. So I'll be honest, I'm not a nuclear deterrence expert. So I look at it from the sort of broader defense analytical perspective. I do not see a very big nuclear risk at the moment. I think there is a lot of conversation. A nuclear threat is something that Russia likes to use every now and then when it wants to affect conversations, opinions, decisions as well. And we're again at that point. And I also want to caution against the fact that, really, you need to have a conversation about what it actually is to have, sometimes you'll say, oh, well, use of a tactical nuclear weapon as a deterrent. But you actually have to think about what it means to use a tactical nuclear weapon, where it would be used, how it would be detonated, and what kind of impact it would have and where. And then you really have the realistic understanding of, is this going to work as a deterrent or escalation or not? So I think that is the sort of part of the conversation that we sometimes forget about, what it actually means in practice.
Thanks. Hey, Sarah, back to you, because we have been talking about it. So at what point do you mentioned as pieces move around the board, we may be concerned, but I just love to have your final thoughts on that.
Again, it's the issue on proliferation or the use of so-called tactical nuclear weapons.
On the use.
On the use of tactical weapons? Yeah. Well, there's a military and alliance component here. The military component, it's not clear what, it's not clear what Russia would even gain militarily by using a tactical nuclear weapon in terms of the situation on the battlefield. But it would then, the political effect of basically breaking the taboo the first time since 1945 would be enormous. Now, enormous in terms of the reaction of NATO. There is, well, Radosław Sikorski has been very explicit about apparently what NATO would do. It's basically a complete, massive, conventional attack on any Russian positions in legal Ukrainian territory. Okay. But also in terms of Russian alliances, there's not that many and relatively isolated. The one thing that China has said that is not inclined towards Russia since the beginning of the war is don't do it. And they've said that publicly, and it's on their peace plan that dates from February 2023. Don't use nuclear weapons. Well, of course, they use a different diplomatic language, but the message was very clear. So the cost, the military gain is questionable. The political, the military cost might be huge coming from NATO, but then the diplomatic and then alliance, and therefore also in terms of supply chain, a lot is coming from China that has dual use, might be too high for the Russians, would be my understanding.
Thanks. Go ahead. Minute.
I'll just in that last minute, I'll take Mr. Ellison's last minute. Professor Ariel, you talked about Russian artillery is now outpace all of NATO combined. We also know that they're getting munitions from North Korea and drones and missiles from Iran. How far back is NATO allies, and how can Canada do more to help supplement that production of artillery shells and rockets?
The gap is considerable.
Like, you got a number? Can you quantify?
With all due respect, I don't see any shift in Canadian policy on that front. Zero. There's been shifts in Europe, but it takes time to restart that kind of production. It was kind of the peace benefit of the end of the Cold War. NATO prepared for a war that never happened, except it happened 25 years later. A high-intensity conventional warfare without that kind of capability. Because we didn't think, the NATO coalition, never thought that a war that looks like World War II in terms of how it's conducted on the ground, minus the drones, would occur again. So here what we see in Europe is a variation in the political will to really engage medium and long term, because short term is really, really difficult to match the, we have to say, remarkable capabilities of Russian production here.
We're going to have to leave the question and answer there. Final on this round, Mr. Pawlowski.
Is it Mr. Sederman or Sederman? Sederman. You made an interesting statement, and now I may have written this down wrong, but you said, when will Russian military mutiny, or maybe you said, will they? Do you, and it kind of goes to the heart of the question. What evidence is there that that might happen? I know certainly Prigozhin's march on Moscow, which was quite a surprise, was in fact a mutiny, but the Wagner force has been disbanded. Certainly the Russians have shown, the Russian military command has shown a total disregard for their frontline troops, repeatedly throwing them into meat grinders to die wave after wave. There's been talk of blocking troops on the Russian side, preventing Russian troops withdrawing. There would certainly be seemingly good reasons for the Russian troops to mutiny. How likely do you think it could be? And what evidence is there that that might happen, other than what happened with the Wagner Group?
Well, I think the Wagner Group is a good example. The challenge of civil-military relations is we very rarely know right before something happens that it happens, right? When there's a coup, you don't never attempt, you don't really know who's going to win because you don't know who's going to shoot, who's not willing to shoot. And when it comes to mutinies, the challenge is that the Russian military is aware of the threat, and so they have put in place all kinds of systems to make sure that it doesn't happen. But again, as you pointed out, the way the Russians are fighting this war is incredibly brutal on their own people. They have not provided them with adequate medical care. So the traditional ratios we're familiar with between killed and wounded in action is very different for them because they're not taking care of the wounded. And so when you send, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people into this environment, at some point it can cause a military to crack. At what point? It's not clear. The longer this goes, the more likely it is. Just because of the stress as it builds up, the more people understand that they are being misled, poorly led into battle, that your odds of, as for some people, are my odds better running at the Ukrainians or turning my rifle around against my fellow commanders? There have already been stories, many stories, of Russian tanks being driven over Russian commanders and things of that nature. So there's been small acts. The problem in any kind of mutiny is sort of the collective action, which is how do you get everybody to do it all at the same time? And so we've seen this in other wars. I can't tell you, this is going to happen on March 15th, or I have 100% certainty it's going to happen sometime in the next year. It's just this is a threat the Russians have to grapple with, and it does distract them from the front lines if they have to put troops behind the front lines to threaten to shoot the people on the front lines. It does complicate their war making.
Now, you mentioned the normal ratio between injured and dead, which those numbers are different in the current conflict on the Russian side. Can you tell me what the numbers normally are, what they are now, and where those numbers come from?
The exact specifics I can't be hard and fast on. I would say that traditionally the number has been 1 to 3. That for every one person killed in battle, 3 have been wounded. The Americans and our allies in Afghanistan were very, very good about medical care, so that ratio is 1 to 10. That is, for 1 killed, there were 10 wounded. And I think at one point the statistics we were getting from the Russian side, what we were inferring from what we could see was 1 to 1, which is that for every 1 wounded, 1 Russian was getting killed. Again, truth is the first casualty of warfare, so we don't really know. But ironically, we have a better sense of the Russian casualties than we have the Ukrainian casualties.
What's that?
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. I note the other thing you said, Mr. Sederman, which I found kind of a little bit shocking, is you suggested that our deployment of 1,600 troops in Latvia is not sustainable. We're a country of 40 million people. I kind of say, what? 1,600 people? We don't have the resources to sustain that? Now, you did mention the possibility of bringing over families and the fact that it wasn't an attractive posting. Do you want to just comment more on our military readiness if we can't maintain 1,600 troops overseas?
Question. And he's given you 7 seconds to answer it. Possibly you could work it into a response, because I think everyone in the room is interested in it. That brings to a close our second round. Now, I know there's some enthusiasm for motions. We have about 50 minutes, give or take. We have 25 minutes. We could do another round for 25 minutes and leave the final 25 minutes for motions. Is that an attractive proposition?
We're going to 10:15, aren't we? 10:15.
Oh, I'm sorry, 10:15. Okay. So, assuming there's still enthusiasm for motions, can we shrink this round to a 3-minute round with 3 minutes each?
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, you can talk quickly. So let's because I don't want to abuse witnesses. That's why we're trying to manage the time here. And I know you all love the expression of democracy at committee meetings, but watching it is something not entirely edifying. So let's do a 3-minute
2 minutes,
round.
including the block?
What's that?
On the NDP, or 1 minute each?
She'll get a minute each. Yeah. You think you can manage that?
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Brzan, 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, so, Mr. Saban, you talked about taking what we have and that, like tanks and armored vehicles and just give them to Ukraine. Back in 2022, March 22, after the hot war broke out and full-scale invasion, conservatives called on the government to donate our surplus labs. And then we put an order paper question in. The government said that they had 62 that were repairable and could be overhauled in 220 days and sent. Never happened. Now they announced that they're just sending over, I think it's 60-some labs that are just being sent for spare parts. Wouldn't it have been better to send them 2 years ago when they were still operational than leaving them till they were completely unusable as a fighting machine other than spare parts for equipment they already got there? Would have saved lives, wouldn't it?
I can't speak to the specifics of those 62 labs. Obviously, more in the hands of the Ukrainians sooner is better.
So you weren't advocating, though, you said to take our old tanks that we got, because I think we're down to 56 that are actually still left here that can be trained on. A lot of them aren't fit for purpose anymore. You're saying donate them, let them use them, but you're not advocating that Canada doesn't get rid of its tanks, are you? Because one thing we've learned in Ukraine, it's a tank war.
I think some of our allies have made the decision that it'd be better to be having them used to fight the Russians now than to fight the Russians later. And so the idea of giving them to the Ukrainians to stop the Russian war, to win the war with Russia now, is better than waiting 5 or 10 years for us to use them in Latvia. So that is a difficult political calculation, but it's something we should take seriously. I don't think it's going to happen because it is a risky decision, and it would make it difficult for us to train our tankers. But again, our military on a regular basis has revisited the tank decision about whether to have tanks or not. And if our allies have tanks, is it that important for us to have it? It depends on how comfortable we are with relying on our allies. Allies can be more or less reliable. I've written a book about that. And so as long as we're fighting alongside the Americans, things are pretty good. If we're fighting alongside the Italians,
And that's the case.
Yeah, and that's the case.
That historically, Canada's always had the ability to pull out a full complement of armory along with our army. You know, same as the howitzers, the 777s. Like, shouldn't we be replacing those and send the rest that we got to Ukraine and investing in new howitzers for Canada?
The challenge is everybody's learned how valuable these things are, and I'm sure you know that it takes a while to procure things, and so how long would the gap be between us shipping everything off? So I could see why the Army doesn't want to ship off everything and then wait 10 years for the new tanks and the new howitzers. And the problem is the production lines. Everybody wants the same stuff, so it's not like we can actually, even if we made fast decisions, the stuff is not on a shelf somewhere in surplus.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Ms. Lalonde, 3 minutes. Oh, Mr. Collins, 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sederman, I want to pick up where Ms. Matheson left off with some of her questions earlier around disinformation. And so I was fascinated with your comments regarding Trump, and I've watched with some fascination in terms of what's happening around the world with disinformation. And retired General Eyre warned our committee several times in his appearances here, sitting in the same chair you're sitting in, sir, about disinformation and its impact on our institutions, including the Canadian Armed Forces, but as well as our democratic institutions and our allies as well. And Russia has been very vocal and has bragged publicly about those efforts. Margarita Simonian from RT Television has talked about how successful those campaigns have been. And of course, the Department of Justice last week outed 3 very influential right-wing social media personalities in terms of having received $10 million from Russia. And so with all that said, and with all the things that you talked about with Vice President nominee Vance and President Trump's efforts, it's having an impact. That those disinformation campaigns are having an impact, right? They sway, they influence public opinion, and public opinion then drives political characters to make different decisions. And we're seeing that with MAGA. We're seeing that with the Make Canada Great Again movement that we see with the leader of the official opposition who's pulled his support for Ukraine. And we've seen it in the EU elections. And so, you know, and it's a 50-50 right now, former President Trump is elected, and that support then is pulled from NATO because of, in part, those disinformation campaigns. Where do we go from there, so to speak, in terms of combating what we know is happening? And we haven't shone a lot of light on it, although the DOJ, I think, information last week was very revealing. How do we as a society and as a government deal with those efforts, knowing that they're having an impact on public opinion and they're swaying political representatives to make some very crazy decisions?
Well, it's a really challenging problem. We've known this not for a week, but we've known for 8 years that the investigation into Trump's 2016 campaign. We know this about Brexit, that there are Russian influence on that. It requires, again, as I said, it requires greater clarity from the media about where the information is coming from, to be more careful about repeating false information. I'm as guilty as anyone on social media of, reposting something that I see without really investigating it. We have to have better discipline about figuring out what these stories are and how do we report them. So to give you the example of the Haitian immigrant story, it's entirely baseless, but just talking about it helps to amplify it, right? And so how do we talk about the thing that's coming up and educate the publics about it in ways that undermine the disinformation campaign? So Canada has invested in academics studying this stuff. I've got good friends of mine who are disinformation experts. They faced lawsuits from the far right to silence them. The good news about the stuff last week is the lawsuits are going to be harder to win by the folks who are suing them, because they can say, the exact people that were identified in network analysis of Twitter, all is just this bit of last week's news helps to provide evidence that all these things we've been saying thus far are true.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Don't believe anything about cats and dogs. 1 minute. Madame Normandin.
Rapidement, Monsieur Harel, sur l'accession éventuelle.
Quickly, Mr. Arel, on Ukraine's accession to NATO, you referred to the legal system that had to be looked at. It's a democracy, but not fully liberal democracy. What needs to be looked at there post-war? Accession to NATO and to European Union would be done in parallel. Of course, in Ukraine, the Achilles heel is the weakness of the rule of law, the lack of institutional independence, the Court of Justice. On the issue of corruption, that was prior to the war of 2022. The Allies worked really hard to help Ukrainians set up anti-corruption systems, and their response was, given the fact that the legal system is corrupt, you have to have a parallel justice system that is anti-corrupt so that to cover all the bases. Progress has been made. What's remarkable also is that the political system has been, if you will, suspended because of the war in Ukraine, but oligarchs, the oligarchs that were corroding, if you will, the system have lost most of their rights. So something has fundamentally changed. That said, ultimately, it's always a political decision. It's not about checking all the boxes. It's a political decision.
1 minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question. It might be a bit complicated given this minute. Since the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Putin, many efforts were made on an international level to isolate Putin and also to exclude him from some international organizations. Do you think that has had any effect, and what could be done further to prevent him from continuing this war and becoming a full pariah internationally? We're not sure about the pariah status. The Olympic Games were extraordinary. There was one country, and then there was another vassal state, which is Belarus. That actually is symbolic, but it hurts Russia. I think the decision to isolate Russia forces Russia to find allies that are already isolated, whereas China is trying to maneuver, if you will, on both sides. You can see Turkey is also, trying to play both sides in a way. It's also a NATO member. There are very few allies, but of course there are two very dangerous ones who have decided to directly assist Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Belarus. Mr. Bazan, is it? 3 minutes, please.
I'm going to just ask to our RAND specialist, Ms. Keep. You are a specialist on the Baltics, and we see all the saber rattling. We talk about Russia, but we also know that Belarus has now taken on nuclear weapons from Russia, that there's ADPAD exercises that they've been doing extensively with Russian forces, as well as I believe that there was Cuban forces last year that were part of those exercises along the Latvian and Polish borders. What do you assess the threat level at from Belarus as proxy for Russia to offset the threat environment in both the Baltics as well as in Ukraine?
Thank you. Well, in addition to the examples that you mentioned, the really important one is essentially we've seen a trend of Belarus and Russia integrating military closer and closer, and that has been also supported by official agreements as well. So from a defense planning and threat assessment point of view, I would treat Belarus and Russia together as a threat. So really when we see as a threat from the conventional military side, but also as a similar sort of cooperative threat also from the hybrid types of threats, right? We see that from the point of view of exercises, military integration and cooperation. We see that also from the point of view of hybrid threats, the forced migration activities that have been going through Belarusian territory as well.
So when we look at the Russian drone that ended up in Latvia, do you believe that, I'm sure the Russians are saying, no, it just flew off course, but do you think that maybe it was done accidentally on purpose to test the response of NATO allies, and particularly the enhanced forward position that Canada leads in Latvia?
So I actually haven't seen any Russian statements about what exactly happened. So investigation is still ongoing. Even the Baltic officials have different sort of opinions on what really happened. I think no one really thinks that it was done on purpose. There are some conversation that it may have been let's say, the drone was intended for Ukraine, and that there was a really big targeting problem that happened. That is why it's either crash landed or landed in the territory of Latvia. So we still have to, let's say, I will wait for the investigation. It could be a malfunction. It could also be, you cannot waste a good crisis. So it does serve as a way for Russia to see what is happening, what are their reactions on the political side, but also on the sort of tactics and procedures that the Baltics nationally, but also NATO uses to respond to these threats.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Ms. Lalonde, 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you to all our witnesses today. I have to say this has been extremely relevant and informative. I would like to hear a perspective, and I'm not going to direct towards one particular, maybe the three of you, but certainly the ambassador of Ukraine was here during our last committee and talked about, when we asked her, is a path towards a NATO membership. That's been Ukraine's, ask of all our allies country. Could you maybe tell me or tell us, how do you see this going forward, and how would that look like with the possibility of a Trump president? And I would certainly appreciate to hear from the three of you.
The challenge is that Article 5 means an attack upon one equals an attack upon all. So NATO's position has been not to allow in countries that are currently at war. In the 1990s and early 2000s membership processes, there was pressure for all of the aspirants to settle their border disputes. What's going on now is far more than a border dispute. So the war has to end before Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. Then when that happens, I think it would be a very short path, because we would like to avoid having a future war in Ukraine. So I think it would, there are all the other conditions, but as my colleague suggested, really the conditions themselves don't really matter. The whole paper process is about whether the alliance can get consensus. And until the war is over, there will be no consensus. Now, we're forgetting that Trump's first impeachment was about trying to extort Zelensky to get information on Biden. So I don't think that a Trump-led government would agree to Ukrainian membership. That, again, we need consensus, and if the United States does not join the consensus, there is no consensus.
Okay. Je peux répondre en français?
S'il vous plaît.
Oui. C'est pas tellement différent de ce que Stephen a dit.
I won't stray much from what Stephen just said, but the challenge is not NATO membership. It's the idea of NATO being able to defend Ukraine, those security guarantees. First, you have to be at a situation where Russia can no longer attack Ukraine. And when you're talking about negotiations, that's an issue that's always outstanding. It was already outstanding in Istanbul. What are these security guarantees? It means that Russia can no longer attack us, cannot attack us, not because American soldiers are going to defend us, but because we are already equipped through NATO and our own industry to make sure that the costs of an attack would be excessive for Russia. Once you pass that stage, that's the toughest part. Then the question of whether Ukraine can join NATO. To me, that would be less of a challenging issue.
That brings your 3 minutes to a close. And I do want to leave a few minutes left for motions. Mr. Bazan's hand is waving in the breeze here. I just want to thank you all. But before I dismiss it, maybe I'll direct to Mr. Seidemann. It seems to me after 9/11, Americans triggered Article 5 in NATO. Is that correct?
Actually, it was the Canadians and its allies who inflicted Article 5 upon the Americans. At the time, the American administration was ambivalent about having Article 5 invoked. And so it was actually Canadians and other NATO allies that invoked Article 5 for the first time. Only time.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, it does seem to be kind of a relevant historical precedent. So with that, I again want to thank each and every one of you for your contribution. This has been informative, and I do wish at some point Mr. Pawlowski's question gets answered. With that, I'll dismiss you, and poor old Mr. Bazan's right arm can take a rest right now, and we'll go with one of your motions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you to the witnesses for being here today and helping us with their threat analysis. I gave notice of no motion back last week on Friday, September 13th of the following, that the committee invite the Minister of National Defence to appear before the committee for no less than 2 hours within 14 days of the adoption of this motion in relation to his priorities for the return of Parliament and his mandate. I think that as we come back here in what might be the last few weeks or months of this Parliament, that we should know what the minister's priorities are. We just heard, the ongoing aggression to NATO and in Ukraine, and that we need to be supporting them. We also know that our Canadian Armed Forces are still dealing with the recruitment crisis. We know that that procurement continues to lag. It's been a failure of this government, and so we need to ensure that we hear from the minister on what his priorities are.
Ms. Lalonde.
I thank my colleague for bringing this motion on the floor. I think on principles we would agree. My only, from the debate that I heard from all of you, and certainly from Minister Blair yesterday, our Minister of National Defence, his priority, and he was very strong in his comments when he did his introduction of the second reading of C-66, to say that is a priority. We need to find ways collectively, and I think we have a collected, hopefully, consensus to bring C-66 here as early as possible to continue on the path to help bring forward this legislation and bringing to a real assent. So on this token, I think, if Mr. Bazan would be comfortable maybe to do a friendly amendment to say for no less than 2 hours, to remove the 2 hours and put 1 hour plus 1 hour officials, we feel that we could let it go.
1 plus 1. That is a amendment to the motion, and apparently it's not friendly. Any other speakers on either the amendment or the motion? Mr. Bazan.
The reason we want the minister here for 2 hours is because we're talking about priorities of his leadership as the minister. I don't believe having government officials here reflects the political priorities of the minister and of the government. So it has to be for 2 hours to talk about. And, we're going to have the minister here, I'm sure, when we get C-66 as well, to talk about C-66. But that's going to be about the legislation. And our committee will be seized with that bill when we get it. It'll take priority according to the procedures and House Affairs requirements of Bosque Gagnon, and so we need to be seized with it. So we're going to have plenty of time to talk about C-66 when we get the legislation from the House. I would just say that we need the minister here for 2 hours, because we have lots of questions around Ukraine. We have lots of questions about procurement. We have lots of questions around housing. We have lots of questions around recruitment and retention. He's announced the submarines. Why is it taking as long as it is to procure that? We've also heard that there's been a number of order paper questions that have been answered, and now we're seeing that the over-horizon radar system has been punted down the road until after 2040. And yet in the next year or two, the radar constellation that we have in the north, in the North Warning System, is obsolete. So what we need to hear from the minister is how is he going to protect Canada, how is he going to be a reliable ally, and how is he addressing the shortfalls in the forces. That takes at least 2 hours.
Ms. Lalonde.
And again, I don't want to sound overly partisan or political, but I'm quite, again, shocked that particularly this member is asking minister to come and speak, because when you look at some of their records on defense spending, that fell below 1%. But I would just want to remind this particular member, he voted against a pay increase. He voted against supports for. So for me, you know what, I would maintain my decision. I think we should have our minister. He's always been extremely sensitive of our needs to come, although he's got a very big job to do right now. He's been coming every time. We're just suggesting a 1 hour plus 1 hour.
Vote.
Debate. First vote is on the motion, on the amendment, sorry. I get so much help from you. It's just, I don't even pay for it. Wow. So the first vote is on the amendment. Does everybody understand the amendment? Those in favor of the amendment? Those opposed? The amendment passes. The second vote is on the motion as amended. Those in favor of the motion as amended? Motion passes. Oh, you're against? Yes, I don't think so. Oh, okay. I think your hand is waving now. Okay. So we'll go to Madame Normandine's motion, which is in order and is timely. So, Madame Normandine.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The motion was read on Tuesday, and there was proper notice of a motion. I won't reread it. It was circulated to all members. The idea here would be to have the former Minister of National Defense, who was responsible for the evacuation of Kabul in 21. We learned through the Globe and Mail that the minister might have provided some directives that were not coercive to prioritize the evacuation of Afghans of the Sikh faith to the detriment of Canadians. And then certain individuals, including interpreters, were left behind because the resources to evacuate people were limited, which leads at best to some questions, but actually at worst indignation. The list of witnesses that we suggest to have before the committee would be the current Minister of National Defense, because we'd like to understand how orders to the special forces in these kinds of situations are sent and how the minister perceives that to be done. Then we also have the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because there are other lists for evacuations, priority lists that had been submitted. We'd like to know what the other priority groups that needed to be evacuated were, and which ones were on the list, and in which way the former Minister of Defense analyzed this list. We'd like to hear from, of course, the former Minister of Defense for 2 hours, so he could explain what led to him making this decision, in light of there being other considerations for priority groups, but also Canadians and Afghan allies, and what his reading was of the resources that were limited to evacuate everyone. And then, of course, there's General Vance, the Chief of the Defense Staff at the time, to see how these orders were received, and also other questions to follow. And all necessary witnesses for us to be able to proceed to a complete study of this matter. That's the essence of the motion.
Mr. Bazan.
We have an amendment to the motion. I believe that it's been circulated. Okay, we printed it off. Just make sure everybody gets it here. So what we are suggesting is there. What is highlighted is additions. What is with a strike through is to be deleted. Once everybody has it, I'll speak to that motion, because it is disturbing with the news reports that were out there. But there's also been work that is done on this previous part of this Parliament.
Monsieur le Président, je vais me permettre juste...
Mr. Chair, I'll interrupt because I see that these two versions are not identical in English and French. In English, parts of the motion, which the interpreter does not have in the booth, are redacted, but we don't have the equivalent in, or struck out rather, but we don't have the same thing in French.
Okay, so let me speak to it, and interpreters are looking for it as
The
well.
interpreters are, can we go into them? Okay.
Yeah, if we can get it into the interpreters.
Okay, so everybody's literally on the same page?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Bazan.
Okay, so essentially, I'll just go through here. The first amendment would be to add a special before evacuation operation, then delete from after August 2021 to the end of Allied Afghans, delete that out and add, and that the Special Committee on Afghanistan, Report Number 1, Honoring Canada's Legacy in Afghanistan, Responding to the Humanitarian Crisis and Helping People Reach Safety, was tabled in June 2022, followed by a government response that was tabled in October 2022, and then add in the next paragraph, after committee questions, on the implementation of the recommendations made in the above report and new information that came to light after the study. Those would be the additions, and we'd remove everything between August 21st to Allied Afghans.
Debate? Madame Normandin.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I am uncomfortable with the fact that we'd be removing what seemed to be the very purpose of having the minister here, or that the purpose of the minister at the time, from what the Globe and Mail was discussing at the time, it was that it was one priority group over other groups, and that's what led to the fact that Canadians were about to be abandoned behind or left behind in Afghanistan. I'm kind of confused as to why they would want to do this. Why would the Conservatives actually specifically want to remove this aspect relating to the minister's motivation at the time?
I'd just say that it's redundant since you're already referring to the article in the first part of the preamble of Globe and Mail story, and that was an order that was given by the Minister of Defense at the time, Harjit Sajjan. So that is covered in the motion because of the article in the Globe and Mail. I don't think we need to reiterate that in the motion, and I also want to put in there that that we have a report that was already done on that evacuation through the Special Committee on the Afghanistan report. There is, based upon that story from the Globe and Mail, that is the new information that has come to light, and that needs to be looked at. But also we want to know if the government has implemented those recommendations. They responded to the report, but have they actually gone forward and implemented all those recommendations?
Madame Normandin.
I reiterate my comments, and I'd add one thing. The Conservatives don't have the reputation for being shy about redundancy. In fact, they might reuse entire segments of newspaper articles in their motions, and actually sometimes quite acerbic in their approach. I'm quite surprised by their reticence in this case. The issue of prioritizing one group over another is really at the heart of this issue, and I think it needs to be named in the motion if we really want to be able to respond and to this issue and avoid this recurring in the future, to have some priority groups versus others for the wrong reasons, where we knew there was a list of priority groups that needed to be evacuated, and that list was not respected, and that is the really heart of the issue. I can't see how we could just set that aside and say, oh no, it's been referenced in the article.
Further debate? So the first vote would be on the amendment, for want of a better term, the Bazan amendment or the Conservative amendment. Those in favor of the Conservative amendment? Opposed? The amendment fails. Those in favor of the original motion as presented? No? You want to debate on that? Okay.
Well, I hope it's not a debate. I would just like to propose, again, a small change to Madame Normandin's motion. Puis c'est juste par rapport au point A, lors de son...
And it really has to do with point A, you know, when she's asking for individuals to appear before the committee, we would like to remove the Minister of National Defense, Minister Bill Blair, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Madame Melanie Joly, and the government officials for a minimum of 2 hours. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when this happened, or what was referred to in the Globe and Mail, the Minister of National Defense, current minister, Minister Blair, was not the Minister of National Defense, and Melanie Joly was not Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I'd like that to be, that I would like my minister, my colleague to consider this.
Je serais partante pour...
I'd be open to this as a friendly amendment insofar as point D is maintained. So any other witnesses the committee deems necessary, we might have additional information revealed so that we could perhaps, when we hear from these witnesses, so that we can know where to turn. Minister Blair, as a current minister, could shed light on the way in which orders sent to the special forces during an operation could be sent. But these are questions that I could ask when he appears before the committee at another time. As for Foreign Affairs, perhaps we could have officials from Foreign Affairs, senior officials, perhaps immigration officials, but that I think we'll have a better idea of when we have more testimony before the committee. So long as point D is still in it and that we can ask other witnesses to appear during the committee, that's fine.
So the vote, no other debate? So the vote would be on the Normandin motion as presented, deleting paragraph A. Is that correct? You accepted it. Okay. Those in favor? Opposed? None? Seeing that. Okay. We've got 5 minutes. What have we got? No, we've got...
Yeah, but you have to give him the time. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I thought we were. I said it was a friendly amendment.
It doesn't exist. That's not a real thing.
Okay. I think it exists. All right. Those in favor of the motion as amended, please. Thank you. Okay. I see Mr. Boulderus, and presumably he has a motion, and we have how much time? 9 minutes.
Oh. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Boulderus, your motion, please.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. It's a motion tabled by my colleague, Madam Matheson, recently. I would hope we would be able to address it. I don't think it's that controversial. It has to do with a study of contaminated sites with respect to the health of forces members. I can read it. I think it's something that is important, and it is a concern for a number of veterans. Chemicals and cancerous or carcinogenic chemicals that they were exposed to. I think it's important for the committee to address this issue. So 6 sessions and a list of witnesses are proposed, including some veterans that are affected by this today. I think it would be a good idea to hear from them. Madame Lalonde.
Nous sommes bien en accord avec...
We agree with this motion. Microphone.
Yeah, are you debating or are you wanting to vote?
A quick comment on it. Like, we support the motion. I just don't know if we can afford 6 meetings in the time that's left, and that our committee has a big workload in front of us. So I would suggest that, based upon the draft reports that are still to come back and have to be tabled, based upon C66 coming here, based upon estimates and everything else that we have to deal with, the DPU study as well, which we've started, and the space study, that this needs to be punted down the road until we get those wrapped up before we start another study. But this is an issue. This is a concern, especially for those at National Defense who are firefighters and veterans who were exposed, and we do need to dive into this.
So you're suggesting that this government will last right through to all this agenda?
I just
want
you never know the way the guys are voting around the table here.
Madame Normandin.
Rapidement.
Quickly, a similar comment. We have a number of motions that are very interesting before us. The issue is the agenda. I mentioned it in the House. We have far more work than time to deal with it. A subcommittee meeting on agenda would be a good idea.
Okay. Are we amending the 6 or we are not amending the 6? We're not. Okay, those in favor of the motion as presented? Those opposed? Not. Well, this brings our meeting to a close. Thank you very much for blowing a hole in our agenda. I will have, we're scheduled to do a DPU review on Tuesday, and the Chief of Defense Staff on Thursday, along with Representative Singh on Indo-Pacific. Assuming that 66 is not referred to the committee by then, we'll have to, at this time next week, review our agenda and hopefully arrive at some sort of understanding about how to go forward. So, and I may or may not reserve some time for a subcommittee meeting around that time. With that, thank you. Meeting adjourned.